Give me a thumbs up if, okay.
Is it there?
Can you guys hear us? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us?
There we go. All right, I'll take it from the top. Warm-up lap. So I would like to, I call the meeting to order and thank everyone for attending. I'm Deb Travis, the Chair of Community Board A Parks and Recreation Committee. I have a few housekeeping items for the discussion. As Community Board Committee, we loosely follow Robert's Rules of Order. We will be following the agenda that was previously distributed. If we open a topic to general discussion, we ask that if you would like to speak, you raise your hand and I will call on you. Our goal is to have a good, robust discussion of our agenda items. However, if we have many people who would like to speak on an individual topic, you may only get to speak once, so make sure to make it count. If you're not speaking, we ask that you keep yourself muted to prevent background noise from interrupting others. If you're on Zoom, to raise your hand, you select reactions at the bottom of the screen. If you're on the phone, it is *6 to mute and unmute, and it is *9 to raise your hand and to lower your hand. All right. So I'm just going to do a quick attendance. Bob Bender.
Here.
Margaret Della. Present. Robert Friese.
Here.
Hellman. David online.
Any other?
Okay. Rashida.
I'm here.
Rob Duklaski. Rob, are you online somewhere? Dot Singh. Deb Travis. Are there any other board members? I see Julie Reyes and I see Mandy Blake. Is there anyone else? Are there any elected officials on the call? Or anyone representing an elected official? Okay. And then is there anyone here from an agency? Christina Taylor from Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, I see you. Is Stephanie on the call?
Yeah, she's up there, third down on the left.
Okay. Stephanie Ehrlich. Okay. Is there anyone else here from Parks? New York Times puzzle. Fine. Okay. All right. So next, I would like to approve the minutes of the November 29th committee meeting. Were distributed to committee members ahead of the meeting. Does anyone on the committee have any changes? All right. If there are no objections, I move to approve the amended minutes by unanimous consent. Any objections? All right. Minutes of November 29th, 2023 are unanimously approved. For the chair's report, I just have one piece of great news. Hey, Rob. Rob Duklaski is here. And one piece of really wonderful news, which is I received word today that Fort Independence Playground has been chosen as one of the 20 parks citywide to receive it's a combined $100 million in capital investment through the Parks Department through their Community Parks Initiative program. So it's wonderful, yeah. Mm-hmm. So through this program, the Parks Department works with the community directly to redesign or reconstruct smaller local parks, and the kickoff is expected to be sometime in 2025. Yeah. Very exciting. David, you're here. Okay. All right. And so now we're going to move on to our first agenda item, which is a presentation by the National Society of Colonial Dames of New York regarding the renewal of the license to operate Van Cortlandt House Museum. So in November, we began a discussion. I just want to do a little background for folks who weren't on that call. In November, we began a discussion on the operation of the Van Cortlandt House Museum. For those who were not in attendance, the National Society of Colonial Dames of New York has historically held the license to operate the Van Cortlandt House Museum. This license lapsed, and so at our last meeting, we raised several concerns regarding the restricted membership policy of the organization, which requires that all members be a direct descendant of a person of prominence in the American colonies prior to July of 1775. This precludes most people, particularly in the Bronx, from actively participating in the National Society of Colonial Dames, and consequently prevents Bronxites from directing the activities, programming, and staffing of the Van Cortlandt House Museum. Additionally, we question whether a volunteer-operated organization with a dual mission of encouraging education of the colonial period and as kind of a lineage-based social club can effectively manage a modern, publicly owned historic house in Van Cortlandt Park and a privately owned historic house on the Upper East Side. So, and further, whether their restricted membership deters nonprofit granting organizations and elected officials from providing funding that the organization needs to offer high-quality education and public programming that the House deserves. So, since the death of George Floyd, which came up during our November call, there has been a sea change in this country, and we're questioning whether the National Society of Colonial Dames of New York is the right steward for the next chapter at Van Cortlandt House Museum. So I would like to introduce, I guess, Lee, who's the person I should give the floor to?
Why don't we give the floor to Marguerite Morrison?
So I'd like to introduce Marguerite Morrison, the president of the National Society of Colonial Dames of New York. And also, before we get started, I would just simply like to thank them for coming tonight. You know, very few people would consider being invited to present at a community board committee meeting on a perfectly good Wednesday in the rain as the equivalent of Willy Wonka's golden ticket. Let alone to come discuss questions of racial insensitivity and very complicated issues. So I want to just thank you for coming in good faith, and I have a hope that we will have a very good discussion about the current state of affairs. So thank you. So
Thank
now
you,
I give
Deb.
the floor to Marguerite.
Thank you, Deb. Good evening. On behalf of the National Society of Colonial Dames, I would like to thank the community board for inviting us to this evening's meeting. I'd also like to thank all of the members of the local community that have come out this evening for taking the time to meet with us and discuss some of the issues facing our beloved museum house.
Deb, sorry to interrupt. Can you also open screen sharing? I have the presentation on my computer, not on Marguerite's, unfortunately.
So Clint will make you a co-host so
Okay,
that you can
sure.
share.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I think that will work.
Yeah, reduce the just to the one photo.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Good. Clint, why don't we go to slide 2? My name is Marguerite Morrison, and I'm the president of the National Society of Colonial Dames in the state of New York, what we refer to as the New York Dames. Also joining us from the Dames, I'd like to introduce Lee Potter, who is there at the table, former president and the current chair of Van Cortlandt House Museum and Collections Committee, and Marcy Sendex, vice president of the Van Cortlandt House Museum. In addition, we have 2 of our staff members, Nick Dembowski, site historian and educator at Van Cortlandt House Museum, and Clint Allen, our properties manager. We are also privileged to have 2 representatives from our national organization in DC joining us tonight, Carol Cadu, who is the executive director of the national organization, the NSCDA, and Cecily Nesbitt, also from national and the director of institutional advancement. Next slides. We would like to thank the Parks and Recreation Committee of the Bronx Community Board 8 for extending this invitation to us this evening. We have long hoped to build a more direct line of communication with the community. And over the past several months, we've had the opportunity to meet with Commissioner Ponte, members of the community board, and volunteers and staff from Parks and HHT, Historic House Trust. Many of us have had the opportunity to view the YouTube recording of the November 29th meeting. We look forward to answering many of your concerns from that meeting as possible. Next slide. In preparation for this meeting, Chairperson Travis sent us the following list of questions. Although we have addressed some of these questions directly to Deb Travis, we will do our best to answer these questions over the course of this presentation for everyone. We will also do our best to keep the presentation as short as possible, hopefully leaving plenty of time to open the floor to the members of the community. Next slide. This evening, we'd like also to discuss with you the genesis of the New York Dames and its stewardship of Van Cortlandt House Museum. Please enjoy this short video presentation by Carol Cadu and then our presentation narrated by Clint. We look forward to answering any remaining questions after the presentation.
In 1891, the NSCDA was founded as a service organization for women who descended from someone present in the American colonies by 1776 and who performed an important service in the formation of the United States. The purpose of the society was very definite. It sought to preserve old records, family Bibles, wills, deeds, vestry books, church registers, and other early American manuscripts, to erect monuments to mark the sites of notable historic events, and to preserve historic houses to be furnished and opened as museums. The Society also committed to offering scholarships, lectures, and prizes for the encouragement of the study of history. The women organized themselves by state and fanned out across the country to spread their mission. The Van Cortlandt House in the Bronx was the first historic property to be preserved and opened as a museum in 1897.
I'm going to take over here and try and keep this as brief as possible. Around that time, the New York Dames had formed. The Van Cortlandt House was also going through some changes. The house had been held by the Van Cortlandt family until 1887, when it was sold to the city of New York. Uninhabited and in its solitary location, the house became vulnerable to vandalism and began to suffer from deterioration. The newly formed Colonial Dames decided rescuing this house would be a great way to fulfill their mission. The house, originally built by enslaved people held by the Van Cortlandt family, dated back to 1748 and had a mixture of English, Dutch, and early colonial influences. It was a piece of American history that the Dames believed deserved to be preserved. The city was interested in having the Dames operate VCHM, but they had no legal means of entering into a partnership with a private organization. The Dames president, Mrs. Townsend, went to Albany to campaign the state legislature. Her efforts resulted in the passage of Chapter 837 of the laws of 1896. This created the first public-private partnership in a New York City park and paved the way for many others to follow, such as the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance and the Central Park Conservancy. And it made VCHM the first historical property to be operated by the Colonial Dames, the first historic house museum in New York City, and only the fourth in the country. The Dames' initial concept for the Van Cortlandt House was to present for public view the dwelling of a Dutch New Amsterdam family from the 18th century. On May 27, 1897, the museum was finally ready to open its doors to visitors. The museum was to operate year-round, free to the public except for one day a week. This format of a living museum became a model for other state societies to follow as they began to preserve and showcase historical landmarks of their own. The early years of the Van Cortlandt House Museum were a huge success. The Colonial Dames donated a garden and fountain, which are unfortunately lost to time, for park goers to enjoy. The house often saw hundreds of guests a day. Temporary exhibitions of items on loan from members or other organizations helped to draw guests back up to Van Cortlandt Park. With concerts, exhibitions, meetings, naturalization ceremonies for new citizens, and hands-on learning events, VCHM was both a cultural center and remained a wonderfully preserved piece of early American history. The Dames helped the house become recognized as a New York and national landmark and put on the National Registry of Historic Places. Classes from nearby schools came to the house to learn about colonial life, and the Dames began to hold their June board meeting at VCHM. These two traditions have continued to this day. Throughout the last 128 years, VCHM has become one of the most important sites operated by the Dames. Now, before we discuss the museum's operation during our current time, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the NSCDA, its mission, its accomplishments, and address some of the questions posed to us by the committee. As we previously mentioned, the Dames were founded in Pennsylvania in 1891 after a group of determined women, including our own Mrs. Townsend, had had success in building the Women's Pavilion at the Centennial Exposition. They turn their eyes to a more lasting legacy of preservation now, particularly the preservation of colonial and early American history, much of which was being torn down during the Industrial Revolution. Through the organization, though that the organization has always been nonpartisan in nature, these women were the early suffragettes and women's rights activists of their day. You may then wonder why these radical women chose the name colonial dames. Well, our dames took the word from the dames' schools of the day. These were early British and American schools, mostly taught and run by women and geared towards the working classes. The dames' schools provided an accessible education in reading and writing. Thus, the colonial dames were providing a dame's education in colonial and American history. Today, the NSCDA is a national society with 44 corporate societies throughout the United States. Our mission is three-pronged: preservation, patriotic service, and education. The NSCDA focuses on its preservation mission by owning and are operating more historic properties than any other private group, including the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In fact, we are the largest alliance of museums and historic sites in the nation, except for the National Park Service. In November of 2000, the National Trust presented their prestigious Trustee Emeritus Award for Excellence in the Stewardship of Historic Sites to the NSCDA. To support our mission of education, state societies run an essay contest that sends 52 students from all over the country to the week-long congressional seminar in Washington, D.C. We award over $131,000 for scholarships and educational awards nationally, including the New York Society Scholarship for CUNY graduate students that has been given continually for over 56 years. We donate over $19,000 annually to the American Indian Medical Scholarship, awarding students scholarships for college who represent indigenous tribes nationwide. We perform naturalization ceremonies nationwide, spending over $16,000 on citizenship programs that benefit over 600,000 people. We know at the last minute that, we know at the last meeting, the membership practices were brought up as a point of concern for this committee, and we would like to address that here. NSCDA members are composed of those who can document their lineage to ancestors who resided in an American colony and rendered service, whether as a midwife, a baker, a minister, or a court official that contributed to the founding of our nation. Our society is open to all such women and tends to attract those interested in American history, genealogy, and women's advancement. Those membership requirements are mandated by the national organization. They date back to the founding of the society, and obviously they offer some obstacles and are becoming as diverse a body as we might like to be. But we are committed to this change, and our members are working to make it so. Thanks to modern technology and a renewed interest in finding your roots with things.
Clint, can you stop for one moment?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Or just a point of clarification, can you go back one slide? You mentioned bakers and such, and I don't see that anywhere in that paragraph, and I'm just not sure if I'm missing it.
No, so the paragraph that we have on display is from our bylaws, right? And they can speak to this more after the presentation. We mentioned this just as a way of showing the ways in which people provided service to the early nation and to the survival of the colonies. We're not limited to, I know the term is used a lot, people of prominence. We're more interested in the service that was provided.
Yeah, we can discuss that further. I just wanted to make sure I was I wasn't.
No, you're absolutely right. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think we can discuss that further after the presentation. I will jump back in. Thanks to modern technology and a renewed interest in finding your roots with things such as Ancestry.com and 23andMe, it has become possible for us to identify and approve new ancestors that potential members can trace their lineage back to. We currently have over 9,700 approved ancestors. While a few of those are women, the vast majority are men of European descent. To help alter this, we've started the 250 by 250 program in hopes of identifying 250 female ancestors by the year 2026. With 91 newly approved ancestors, we are well on our way to meet or even surpass our goal. Technology has allowed us to identify females throughout history and make the case on a state-by-state basis that had it not been for these early women, the colony would not have survived. Two of these women that we would like to highlight include Pocahontas, perhaps one of our most well-known ancestors, and Dinah, a much lesser-known ancestor, an enslaved African-American from Stenton House in Philadelphia. But this is just the beginning, as many more potential ancestors are being identified. The community board asked us to supply the current age and race demographics for our membership. We do not ask for any demographic information other than birth date from our members. I can say that the New York Society has members as young as 3 years old and as old as 100. We were also asked if men were allowed to join. As a historically female society, we do not have any male members, and incoming members are required to identify as female. It is our collective mission as community leaders, historians, and stewards to continue to bring the relevance of ongoing VCHM research to contemporary visitors. It's amazing to think that those first dames began their mission of work at VCHM when the country was only 120 years old, and now 127 years later, we have the great honor of continuing and improving upon that work. In recent years, our focus has been educating visitors about the enslaved peoples who were held on the plantation. Now, the house itself was built by those who were enslaved, and 3 generations of the Van Cortlandt family held enslaved peoples on the property from 1698 until 1823. Some, such as Dinah, worked as house servants. Others, like Piero the miller, performed skilled labor that increased the profitability of the plantation. Those enslaved by the Van Cortlandts left a legacy in today's Van Cortlandt Park that's still visible. They worked on the roads that are now park trails, and they dammed Tibbetts Brook to create the beautiful mill pond still enjoyed by park goers. Thanks to the hard work of Nick Dembowski, our educator and site historian, the Enslaved Peoples exhibit, which originally opened in 2019, has been further fleshed out into an exhibit that can't be replicated anywhere in this region. In the unfinished area of the 3rd floor are a series of rooms that archaeologists believe were the original enslaved quarters for the house. Most historic properties of this era on the East Coast no longer have any trace of their original enslaved people's quarters. And this has given VCHM an important opportunity to tell the story of enslaved people of the Bronx in a visceral way. As these rooms that were originally inhabited by some of the enslaved peoples on the plantation have been remarkably well preserved. By adding maps and signage, we're able to tell the story of enslaved peoples throughout the park, which was then the Van Cortlandt Plantation. And Nick has compiled numerous primary sources, runaway slave ads, wills, and letters, and with them is able to paint a vivid and disturbing picture of what life was like for the enslaved people on the plantation. One of the primary sources that we have on display is a runaway slave ad that Jacobus Van Cortlandt placed in the New York Gazette in 1733. The ad describes the enslaved cooper, Andrew Saxton. As a skilled laborer, Andrew Saxton would have been particularly valuable to the Van Cortlandts. The ad describes Mr. Saxton in great detail, his manner and the clothes he was wearing when he ran away. The ad shows just how much they would be willing to pay in order to get him back. We have used this ad to recreate Andrew Saxton's clothing. Saxton ran away with his cooper's tools, tools that, if he made it to freedom, would have allowed him to earn a very reasonable living. The museum's interpretation also tells the important story of how northern plantations fit into the larger global economy. Objects in the museum's collection tell the story with ceramics from China, European manufactured goods, and materials sourced from Africa, the Caribbean, and Central America. Museum visitors are challenged to consider how the Van Cortlandts' business dealings as merchants meant that their wealth was dependent on the exploited labor of enslaved people in places like the American South, Brazil, and the Caribbean. The museum credits these people who lived and toiled in faraway places as the indirect builders of the Van Cortlandt House. This reimagined interpretation of Van Cortlandt House connects the house's history to the histories of the diverse peoples that live in today's Bronx. It also naturally lends itself to critical thinking about economic justice issues in the global economy of the 21st century. Nick Dembowski, our educator and site historian, leads school groups on guided tours through the museum and grounds that explore the history of the site and its historic inhabitants. For the 2023-2024 school year, we will welcome at least over 1,500 students from the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens, and most of those schools that visit will be public or charter schools. We value our connection with the community greatly and are always looking for ways to improve it. During the COVID pandemic, we unfortunately had to end all in-person public programming. However, we did our best to create digital content during that time that could be used as an educational resource and gave virtual tours. We also had the pleasure of hosting some very inquisitive goats on our lawn. In 2022, with the aid of the Historic House Trust, we were honored to host renowned historian Joe McGill and his slave dwelling project. By arranging for people to sleep in extant slave dwellings, the Slave Dwelling Project has brought much needed attention to these often neglected structures. Most of the slave dwellings that Mr. McGill has partnered with have been in the South. VCHM had the opportunity to bring awareness to the history of slavery in the North. The event included a walking tour and presentation about the history of enslaved peoples on the Van Cortlandt plantation, led by Nick, an interactive campfire conversation led by Joe McGill, and an overnight stay in the Van Cortlandt house. We were very moved by Mr. McGill and his project, and we hope to be able to partner with him again in the future. As we exited the pandemic, we have slowly been able to begin programming at the house. Some highlights of this last year include the Archaeology Day hosted in October that was attended by over 100 members of the public, and the Pinkster Day that was hosted in collaboration with the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance and the Kingsbridge Historical Society. It brought over 300 people to the grounds and included dance, narratives, hands-on exhibits, and food. We're very much hoping that this can become an annual event. Here are some of the other partnerships and collaborations that we hosted in 2023. There's a lot here, but just a few I'd like to highlight are Excavating the Excavation, produced in partnership with Brooklyn College's Archaeological Field School, where students of the field school presented their research related to artifacts unearthed at Van Cortlandt during archaeological investigations. A collaboration with the Bronx Council on Environmental Quality to spread awareness of the Indigenous village and burial site located on today's Van Cortlandt Parade Ground. Working with the Bronx Community College and the tribal historian of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians to conduct a ground-penetrating radar study of the museum's west lawn, and hosting a presentation and walking tour led by Vivian Davis about the history of Van Cortlandt Park's World War I encampment in collaboration with the Kingsbridge Historical Society. We are proud of our accomplishments for 2023, and our hopes for 2024 are even higher. It's always been in the spirit of the house to hold programming from the community. From play readings to musical performances and holiday events to hands-on historic and cultural demonstrations, from summer camps to candlelight tours, we believe that a museum is much more than the walls of the house and the objects inside. And it's our hope that we can expand our offerings over the coming years to welcome even more of the community into the house. The accolades we have received about the museum and the work that Nick has done during his time as director shouldn't surprise anyone. This very community board awarded him with the Irving Latimer Community Service Award in 2020 for documenting the history of enslaved people that lived in the neighborhood. We frequently receive 5-star reviews and great comments about the museum on Google and TripAdvisor, and are listed number 5 on the 10 best house museums in New York. Adam Aronson, the chair of the history department at Manhattan College, recently said, "I have brought students from Manhattan College to the Van Cortlandt House Museum every semester since 2015. I've seen dramatic improvements in the interpretation of the site and in providing a contemporary view of the history of this historic house, its grounds, and the people who lived in the house, including the enslaved. Nick Dembowski's research and the work of the museum staff in providing new displays and interpretation have enriched the experience for me and my students." Professor Christopher McKnight Nichols from Ohio State called museum interpretation cutting edge, and the tribal historian of the Stockbridge-Munsee Indian, Jeff Bendrimer, simply stated, "This is a great museum." In addition to stewarding VCHM, the NSCDNY also owns and operates a historic house on East 71st Street in Manhattan. The house was built by the Dames in 1930, designed by Richard Henry Dana Jr. in the colonial revival style. Much like VCHM, at our headquarters, we also host school tours where children learn about the history of New Amsterdam from our docent, Goody Anderson. During the 2023-2024 school years, we will host at least 2,000 students from Manhattan, Queens, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. Nearly all of our students come from public schools, and many of them come from special education programs. Under the terms of our agreement with the city, the Dames are responsible for the interiors of the house, and Parks and the City of New York are responsible for the exterior. Of course, working in and operating a 17th century house isn't always an easy task. This summer, we went without power for over 2 months. We were able to run an emergency generator during some of that time to stay operational, but during the hottest week of the year, we had to put our caretaker up in a hotel and send our staff home. Flooding is a constant problem in the basement, and in bad snowstorms, you can actually see piles of snow inside the house. The water intrusion has caused damage to the floors, the walls, and even collections items. We're also plagued by wasps that have made nests inside the walls and become extremely active in the late summer months. Keeping up with insects, leaks, rodents, and security concerns distract us from our mission. Maintenance expenses at the museum can be quite high. This chart here shows the maintenance funding source breakdown among the city, the Historic House Trust, and the Dames in blue. Of course, this, along with our operational costs at VCHM, do add up. Due to this, as the community board noted in their questions to us, there is a significant shortfall each year, and spending at VCHM outweighs revenue. This is correct, but as the stewards of VCHM, the Dames see it as their duty to fund the museum to the best of their ability. Staffing is one of our largest expenses, and so I want to take a few moments to discuss our dedicated staff at VCHM and some of the changes we've gone through in recent years. The COVID-19 pandemic changed plans for a lot of people, and in many ways, we are just now beginning to get our feet back under us. I'm proud to say that during the initial shutdown, the Dames were able to keep all staff members who expressed the need on their full salary. Although the museum was closed and our positions really aren't suited for remote work, we were able to find some tasks that employees could do from home, and we continued to pay them their full wages. And although there have been recent staff shakeups, I want to make it clear that none of the staffing changes have occurred due to budgetary concerns. And so this leaves us where we are today. Nick Dembowski, our director, has decided to step into a more part-time role. Since we really can't stand to lose him, we've created the position of site historian and educator for him, which should really speak to his strengths. While we search for a new director, John Carini, our longtime volunteer and a former administrator at the Brooklyn Museum, has agreed to act as interim director. Morena Pineda continues as weekend manager, Rosa Vasquez as custodian, and myself as properties manager. In addition, we also have two other employees at our headquarters, our society administrator, Hillary Walden, and our part-time docent, Joie Anderson. In many ways, the staff is the lifeblood of the museum. The Dames is just an organization of volunteers, and many of them have responsibilities and careers of their own. In the early days of the organization, the founding members saw their volunteerism as a career, but much has changed since 1891. The real decisions and operations of the museum are done by our wonderful staff, and I'd like to take a quick moment just to thank all of them for what they do. Because of this, we see the search for a new museum director as a real opportunity for VCHM. Our last director, Laura Carpenter, held the position for over 25 years. The person before her was there for only a few years, but before that, the director position was held by the same person for nearly 30 years. In fact, most of our previous directors have been employees for over 15 years. Laura did an excellent job with the museum, but the priorities that we were looking for in 1997 are very different than what we're looking for today in 2024. We have an opportunity now to focus on hiring someone who can strengthen our ties to the community and expand our outreach efforts. Our new director will also have the discretion to hire a new museum manager to focus on community engagement. And we are in discussions to bring in a Fordham student as a part-time employee as they work on their thesis in history or some related field. That means that in 2024, not only will we be returning to our pre-pandemic levels of employment, but we will actually be surpassing them. We have high hopes for our staff at the museum over the upcoming year. As we look forward, we are also extremely excited about the upcoming large capital project being undertaken at the museum. I'll let the Historic House Trust give you more details when they're ready, but it's going to be a huge project, and we think the results will be stunning. We do know that it is likely the museum will have to close for a period of time while this work's being undertaken, but we don't plan to abandon the community during that time. We plan to continue to reach out in any way we can, visits to classrooms, presentations at local libraries, digital content, and events on the lawn will all continue during any period of time that the house itself is inaccessible. We're also thrilled to announce the Dames have expanded their partnership with the Historic House Trust to include organizational development and capacity building support, which will include grant writing support. HHT has been a phenomenal partner, and we look forward to finding new ways to work with them to execute both our missions. We hope this presentation was helpful in answering the community board's questions, and most importantly, we hope that it leads to further conversations with the community at large. Thank you.
Thanks, Clint.
And I will stop sharing. Okay, Deb, you can take it back. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Clint. I will refrain from making a joke about the one man showing up with the 5 women being the guy who's doing the presentation.
That's, well, yeah, well, isn't that the history of it, right? Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to say, just as kind of, to follow up on Clint's presentation, or?
All contributed to the presentation and have been working on it for many weeks now. So
Okay.
I think we feel like that's
You wanna open it
everything
to
we want to
questions?
say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess probably the best place to start is the kind of the obvious part, where you started in your presentation essentially, and where we kind of started with our concerns, right? Which is the membership requirements. So, after looking at the presentation, hearing the presentation, I appreciate that you're trying to expand the number of ancestors, right, official ancestors. But the central problem is that most people here still wouldn't, in the Bronx or in New York, wouldn't qualify to be in the organization. And so I think, and that.
May I ask on what you make that statement of your research, or research that you know is available?
Well, I know my neighbors, I know the folks I live around. I mean, I know that, my family's been here a very, very, very long time, and I know how people are shocked when they discover that, because it's so uncommon. And so, certainly there are folks who have somebody on one side or the other, but even that, like, you're still pulling it down to distinguished people, even if it's, I'm not sure how you're going to catalog all of the distinguished bakers of the 17th century, but I think that the membership requirements, this is a predominantly Puerto Rican, Dominican neighborhood where folks have moved here in the 19th and 20th century, a Jewish neighborhood, Italian neighborhood, Irish neighborhood. Folks have moved here in the 19th and 20th century. And so that's the immigration story that folks have, and by and large, that's the majority.
Are they interested in learning about other immigrants to the area, or the history of New York immigration?
I think everybody's interested in learning about the story of New York and understanding how they fit into it, right? Of course. So, but I think that that there's an inherent elitism I will say for myself that when I say, my family came here in the 17th century, that people are impressed with that, regardless of whether they should. It's a womb that I happen to pop out of. That I think that all of those ancestors everybody's ancestors are amazing, because they all brought us here to this moment, right? And so, I think that there's an inherent elitism. It's kind of assumed to it. There's an emotional piece to it. And then on top of it, it is a plantation house. And so because it's a plantation house, and because you're kind of honing in on people who had privilege or stature in the 17th century, you're essentially kind of honing in on folks who had land grants, who had military commissions, who had charters, and who often, if not almost 100%, were involved with creating the plantations, creating this economic system that the house is critiquing.
Deb, I think I get what you're saying, but you mean we're honing in on our programming and our presentation at the house? I don't.
Yeah.
See. Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Bob?
Yeah, so, I'd like to, this was, good overview, thank you, and, I want to cover a few things.
I want to take the membership piece first, and then we'll move over to the
And
main.
the questions about that.
Okay, well, so is there, I'm clear to open it up if,
Oh, just a point of clarification about a bylaws modification that you're pursuing, did I get that? Did Clint mention
do
that?
you want to clarify a little bit the bylaws piece?
That's just outreach and further engagement with people using, ancestry. This is the private corporation you're talking.
One of the things that I think caught everyone is the interest in finding your roots, in Ancestry.com. There has been a great interest, obviously, in trying to understand where people came from. These advances in technology, combined with public interest, have allowed us to go and find other categories. If you'll notice, these women of the 1890s established a list that was largely male, because men were in written records. Women were not so much in written records. Women got the vote the last. They still don't have the ERA, of course, today. But I think one of the reasons that we see an uptick in the ability to identify some of the midwives, some of the bakers, some of the tavern keepers, some of the women who took over their husband's business after they had died, is because of the new research tools as well as the interest. So
You're making, or does that entail changes in bylaws at all? Just, I thought Clint had mentioned that. Are you working with lawyers to change your bylaws?
our bylaws are continually evolving. One of the things that we are doing with our bylaws at the moment is, yes, we are adding, I think, a new.
How many ancestors?
It's the women of distinction.
Oh, it's the women, okay.
I think it's the 250 by 250 you're
Yeah,
talking
I
about.
didn't understand that at all.
Yeah, it's an initiative.
It's an initiative, it's not a bylaw change.
It's not a bylaw change, okay, that's,
Kind of interpreting the existing bylaws in a different way, and when you're defining prominence, I think that's, is that how I took
When
it?
we're defining prominence, we're including women.
Bylaws, I mean, to become a member, you just have to have records that take you back to someone before 17. So that's just the bylaw. The bylaws, but we can have initiatives galore, right, to expand, and to try and to get our group more diverse. We're like any other nonprofit organization, that we want to keep growing. We will shrink if we don't,
are there, within the governance of the board, are there any diversity initiatives that you have?
There are a lot of diversity initiatives.
Not for membership, but for board leadership? Because I do that on behalf of 2 boards, and almost
You have to
every,
be a member to be on the board, I would assume.
yeah.
So that, it's not possible.
We don't, all of the programming that we at the NSCDA do is to preserve a balanced history that is very inclusive and very diverse of American history. In terms of membership, in terms of the board, as Clint's comment mentioned, we do not keep any, or we do not ask our members for any
Demographic information.
demographic information other than date of birth.
Do you have a, advisory board, academic advisory board of any kind?
Yes.
Are they diverse?
Just to go back to the initial, so when you're talking, so this membership requirement, how does it relate to your mission, though? I don't think I understand why it's necessary.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Why which is necessary?
The group, I mean, the thing that Clint just described, right?
Yeah.
Of a group that is, supports women throughout history, wants to acknowledge, women of stature who've done great things, particularly women who've been in the shadows, who want to encourage an understanding of colonial history and the kind of the long history of the country. None of those things preclude or require that the people who administer these programs are direct descendants of these people.
right.
Nobody administering the programs is required.
I think I understand what you're saying,
It seems unrelated to it, like you could drop, like if you drop the requirements, I guess is what I'm asking. If tomorrow you woke up and said, you know, we're gonna take these requirements, we're gonna make an elders program, and if we'll grandfather all the folks who are in, and then we're gonna open our doors to all people who wanna do our mission's work, like, would that change your organization? What would be different that day?
I think what you're asking is for a nonprofit to become a different type of nonprofit. And there are lots of nonprofits in this country For instance, our work with Rick Murphy, for the descendants of enslaved Africans. If he opened up his organization to people like me that appreciate him and appreciate what he does, I would join his organization. Right now, I am not a descendant of an enslaved African, and I can't join his organization. So many different nonprofits have ways of gathering people with similar interests, with similar ways of wishing to tell history. And I think what you're asking is, why does this particular nonprofit exist? This particular nonprofit exists because there were a group of women coming out of the Centennial Exposition who realized for the first time in our country they could do something nationally. They were precluded from doing anything except flowers and music at the Centennial Exposition of our country. They asked for a women's pavilion. They were told they had to raise $100,000. In 33 states, these women went door to door, raised that money. They realized that although they couldn't vote, they couldn't have custody of their children, they couldn't own property, they were under coverture in their identity of their husband, their names not appearing in records, they could do something. And they realized that once the Centennial Exposition was over, as Clint suggested, it offered a remarkable moment for them to say, what else can we do? One of the things that they saw at the Centennial Exposition in those halls was the way in which new technology, construction, was tearing down some historic buildings, and with it, all the papers, the records of everybody who had been here earlier. And their goal was to preserve one of those houses and fill it with as many things as they could gather. And that's when it fanned out across the nation. So why does it exist? It exists because some women who had no other rights in this country knew that if they got together, they could do something meaningful. And that's where you see the volunteerism, I think we said, becoming a career in the 1890s. And it's not just this, it's many other women's organizations, throughout the country.
Wait, let me just finish the.
So to answer just to answer your question, that's why they exist, Deb. And so what I think you have seen is a continuance of women joining this effort. The only requirement is that they share a history of service to the country in one way or another, and they identify as a female. So those are the only requirements.
I mean, and the thing I love your passion about this. And it's a wonderful story, and it's a wonderful origin story. I think the thing that's pointed to me about it is that at that moment when they knew a better way of imagining women, and they found a way to feel empowered, that they still set up membership requirements that excluded people at that time, other women, from joining them. And so they were flawed, they weren't perfect, which is the people, that's us, right? That's the human, the whole darn human experience, right? Is doing things and then learning better and doing better. So, I totally appreciate that. I mean, it's beautiful what they did at that time, but they could have done it better then, they just didn't know. Like, we know better now that the more people you let into the room, you bring into the room, you encourage, the better everything is, the better the outcomes are. So
I guess then what you're suggesting is that any institution like the NSCDA, are you suggesting that it's internally corrupted by the sins of its past, in which...
No, it's the sins of its present that I'm worried about.
Well, we could talk about many organizations or many people if they are, I think you're going to things that are outside the scope of what you understand about the NSCDA, and our intention here was to try to alleviate the misconceptions that I think you brought to the table on November 29th. And I really think that the presentation that you heard here tonight should help you understand that a little bit better.
Well, I'll leave that on the table for a moment, so I will open up. Is there anybody else? Bob, you've spoken, Bob, or?
My questions have to do with programming, so.
Okay.
And house maintenance.
Dave, do you have a question about membership?
Yeah, it's not, well, first of all, it's 250 by 250, I still don't quite understand, but I don't want us to get too lost in, the past. I mean, there are obviously issues. I'm more interested in knowing about the future, what your intentions are about, making your membership and the availability of programs, available to our community at large, and not just, sort of focused on or directed by a group that doesn't live in the community, largely. I mean, you're largely based on 71st Street. So I'd like to know the future of membership and programs.
Mhm.
Membership in the Bronx, like, how many members do you have in the Bronx? You asked me about, like,
And going forward.
The board's concern is our suitability to provide programming that engages the local community. Is that
Your
correct?
ability, not your suitability, but your ability.
Okay, our
and
ability.
to engage the community just as, kind of full stop there. I mean, it's the programming piece, but it's the engaging piece. And what I find is that when folks learn who, runs the house, that turns them off, right? And then, so then they don't want to.
Do you have some metrics that you could give us of people who want to program with us that?
Could I ask a question? So I guess my question is about I am really curious about the past and the present. So I'm curious about, of distinctions, that narrows down who can influence programming and who makes decisions about what. So we can.
No, that's
hiring.
membership. No, membership is different from operations and staffing. I run the staffing. I'm a museum professional. I'm a nonprofit executive. I manage the staff based on the funds that the Dames raise every year for me to, conduct payroll.
Just one quick question, though, just a point of order, or a point of clarification. So you're with the National Society of Colonial Dames of America.
Correct.
Do you make the hiring decisions then for the Van Cortlandt House? Or is that done by the local chapter?
That is done in consultation with the local chapter. I think what you see is that we have an alliance of more than 65 properties.
Right.
As a museum staff, and I consider myself a museum staff, we all have different nonprofit experience. We work together through listservs or communications, and try to, first of all, create an alliance between all those staff members. Some are run by full-time staff, some are run by part-time staff, some are run by volunteers.
I mean, since the Van Cortlandt House Museum is really our main focus, like, for that one, do you do the
No, we don't do
do the hiring, or just Marguerite and, like?
I am not familiar with, the ways in which all the hiring is
We're
conducted.
looking for a director right now. So we've let Carol and Cecily know, who knows where this director is gonna come from. But we're looking at applications. I mean, we've been working on this presentation. I'd like to get to those applications. Anyway, but we will be interviewing people for this position as director of the museum. And I think we've made it really clear that our top priority is the engagement of the community, especially the local community, because that's where our visitors are coming from. Our programming, is, as the quotes say, I think, and you all came to the museum and saw our programming. And so I guess, I'm getting a little, I just don't quite understand why you believe, because we appear to you as an elitist white female group, why you think we have to tell the story about I don't know, what's in the
Your-
kitchen.
Yeah.
Let me give you, it's interesting you say that, but let me give you an example.
Okay, Bob.
David, I played soccer for the New York Athletic Club for 25 years.
Yeah.
And when I first started playing for the NYAC, I was asked by a couple of friends, why do you play for the NYAC? They're known as the No Yids Athletic Club, and I am Jewish. And the reason why I was willing to do it is I didn't experience it at all, any anti-Semitism amongst my peers, certainly not on the soccer field. I became the first governor in 25 years, who is a Jew, to serve on the board, and we changed our bylaws to allow women. For 110 years, 115 years, women were not allowed to become members. We changed our bylaws. That's why we have progressed. And frankly, our women are still only 15% of our membership, which is a different issue that we are continually trying to address. But we changed our bylaws so that there was no exclusion. And there never were religious or race ones, although one could argue that in practice that was different, but I've not observed that either. But it begs the question, we are concerned that by your rules, you're including people from participating, from leading.
From leading?
Leading.
From leading
What? Our organization?
Yeah. If you're not, you can't be a member, then how could you
Well,
be a leader?
you're, I believe, with all due respect, I think you're conflating the fundraisers and the volunteers with those who are leading the sites, the programming, the community engagement.
No, the organization,
Right.
which plans all those other things and the future of the organization.
So let me,
Just to go back for a minute would help, like when I was looking at the job description for the building manager, or is sometimes it's called museum manager, like the job description calls them museum manager.
I'm sorry, other than Harlan, our most recent.
Right now.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's listing right now, like the grant writing, the control of the staff, all of these things don't rest with that person, right? That person is predominantly there strictly for programming, and so the other pieces of who people report to and kind of more strategic stuff.
The director,
But it's not in the job description, like, I mean, I need to. So it gives the impression that.
Could with the job description.
I think you're getting diverted here, I apologize.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm the chair of this committee, so.
I understand.
I'm gonna stop for a second, because, speaking of chairs, the chair of the board is, up on the, video. So we've unmuted her, I wanted to let Julie speak.
Hi, thank
And we'll call on, anybody else who has their hand up.
And my apologies that I'm not there, nor showing my face up. And I do appreciate everyone coming to this meeting. And also, thank you for a very nice tour on Sunday. Nick gave a good presentation, and I thank the Dames for that. And especially, I believe it was Margarita and I afterwards, and Deb, we had a nice, open, frank discussion on the topic that you're speaking of now, on the membership and the criterias, because certainly I could never be a member. And I think what people would just like to know is, because the membership is so limited for myself and everyone else in the room other than the Dames, none of us could be a member. Oh, wait, Deb could. Sorry, Deb, everyone but you. During Clint's presentation, he mentioned that they are taking steps to be more inclusive with membership. And then there was also a mention of the 250 program that you have. Within those two, would you take any steps with the 250 on looking for people who would be qualified to become a Dame, but people of enslaved ancestors?
Absolutely.
One of our qualifying ancestors, Dinah, we mentioned in the.
Right. You mentioned two who just happened, not just happened, but who you have the remains from. Well, Zina, I believe. But are you looking into their families or any other enslaved peoples from that area to see if they
Yeah,
could?
that's a great question. Would you like for me to answer that?
Yes,
Like,
please.
yes, absolutely. You raise a great question, Julie.
Mhm.
We are able to find these women through some of this new technology, this new research. What is a problem is finding the descendants. And so we are engaging all of our historians across the country, all of our volunteers in trying to find these descendants. We also had some very intrepid dames that insisted on putting the information of Dinah in the hands of Henry Louis Gates to see if he could do something through finding our roots and his programming, asking for his help. So we are actively trying to not only identify women and others who have previously been unresearched or unrecognized, but also trying to find their descendants. That's a little bit harder, again, and it all relates back to the evolving nature of research.
It's appreciated that you at least are taking those steps, because coming into a community who I think Deb started out the meeting asking about the inclusion because most of the people within the Bronx would never be able to be a member. And I believe I can't see, but I see heads from my camera, but someone asked what statistics or what proof does she have? I think every person who lives in New York could visually tell who could be a member of your organization. So it's nice to hear that you're at least actively looking for people of color, quite frankly. And I think this opens a dialogue, and it was a good starting point on Sunday for me, at least, with Marguerite. And it would be interesting to see where this all leads. But one last thing, and then I'll turn it back to you, Deb. Sunday, it was mentioned that there was a level of friendship, and I thought, well, that's kind of a good compromise since those people who are not direct lineage, that at least we could be friends of the organization with a membership. But I did not find that anywhere on any of the websites as far as membership at a friendship level.
What Julie's describing is that when we were at the tour, there was this idea that you could also be a friend of the National Society of Colonial Dames, and they did not have to qualify. I mean, it's still second-class citizenship, but that we couldn't find it. I also went and looked on the website and couldn't see any references to how one could become a friend of the National Society of Colonial Dames.
There are many different friends categories. We're a federated society, so every,
Then we're just referring to New York then.
so with respect to New York, I don't know, pardon me, we are in the process of updating our website. It's under construction. I can't tell you what's on the national website at the moment.
Well,
We
friends
might
is,
be able to tell you what's on the New York website. Marguerite?
We did implement the Friends program. I don't know the status of what is on the website, but we can certainly check that. The other piece of this is what we were talking about, Friends of the New York Dames, which is obviously one avenue. But we could have a dialogue about creating something different. For example, something like Friends of Van Cortlandt House Museum, and focusing that on the Bronx community. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that we can have a conversation about making this more of a community endeavor. And I think that would be a worthwhile thing to do. And we're not limited by what we've done so far. And I think that it's quite visible from this group that there's a serious interest in primarily Van Cortlandt House Museum. And so it seems to me that's one avenue that we could explore that we haven't even talked about. And so I think there's a lot of choices here and a lot of different ways to increase community engagement and increase VCHM's engagement with the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite.
Sure, Julie.
Julie, did you have anything else you wanted to say, or should
No,
I go to the next speaker?
I'll
Or
go to the next.
question?
I just wanted to say that, and thank you again.
Thank you, Julie. Danielle, the floor is yours.
Good evening, thank you. I'm going to push back a bit and say that there would definitely be a lot of women of color that qualify to be in your organization. The fact that you have to prove that you are a direct descendant, I'm assuming that you would need to use primary sources. We do know that during that time, the enslaved, they didn't have birth certificates, no marriage certificates. So that precludes them. And I so can relate to the women wanting a voice, but I ask you to please understand that just like you all wanting a voice, I am sure that the enslaved women who had no control over their bodies, they also wanted a voice. So your requirements to show direct descendant, you're precluding enslaved people and their descendants. How are we going to address that moving forward? Because when you know better, you do better. And now we know, like Sally Hemings, there are plenty of people, I'm sure George Washington as well, that their fathers were the founding fathers, but yet that has not been documented.
Would you like
Yeah,
to?
would you like to respond? Yeah.
I'd love to be able to respond and share with you some really good news there, Danielle. One of the things that I think is so exciting is that we no longer have to rely on some of the traditional documents that we have had that have been written records. Because of everything from the GPR that was done, the ground penetrating radar that was done, to archaeological excavations, to all of the ways in which we're able to use technology, we are able now to put the pieces together so that we can document individuals. Let me give you an example. Danielle, you mentioned George Washington.
Yes.
At George Washington's Mount Vernon, we worked for decades and were able to take every single shred of a mention of a gentleman, for instance, on one piece of property and connect him through other records or other objects and documents to others. So we can put pictures together now by combining through databases. For instance, you realize a Moses it's hard to explain the way the database works, Danielle, but it is absolutely amazing to be able to put in, through volunteer hours, thousands of records and be able to pull out a name that finally shows through any kind of documentation. It could be documentation through George Washington issuing, for instance, a pair of scissors to a woman who was a midwife on his plantation. We now know who she was connected to because we found another document in which her husband is referred to as his wife. She's referred to as his wife on another document. We're able to put these documents together so that a woman like that is somebody that we would like to be able to honor her service and try to find her descendants. Does that make sense?
Kind of to Danielle's point, though, and Nick talked about this a bit on our tour, that a lot of enslaved folks were just one female, one male, and that they didn't have names that were documented necessarily in censuses or kind of, they were, you know,
absolutely
numbers on a will that was given, you know, when someone passed to someone else's kids, right? So how do you not open the door so it's wide enough? How do you, like, how do you, we got to open the door wide enough so that everybody who has that experience of the loss, that of all of those folks whose histories were connections, not only were their families broken apart, right? But that the records of those families were also broken apart and erased. So how do you open the door wide enough so that all the folks get to come back in that door?
You do that by having a variety of different programs that attract. And you don't define an organization by who they are, but what they do and how inclusive they are to other communities. The Dames are not defined by who they are defined by their mission and the community service that they do across the country. They open the door through raising money, through making connections, through establishing engagement, through having Friends programs like we just heard about here in New York, or Friends of Museum programs like you have at a number of our different historic sites across the country. You open the door to all visitors to learn about those histories that you're able to document. We wish we could document the histories of so many people in this country. Unfortunately, you're right. For large majorities of people, whether they are people of color or not, we don't have complete documentation. What we can do is to be able to tell stories of individuals that give insights into those that represent the contributions that were made by those who were enslaved, brought against their will. If we can piece together the story of even a handful of these individuals, it gives us a much better window into the past to be able to imagine and share with our audiences the history that others can learn from.
I'm just gonna stop. Danielle, could you unmute Danielle, please?
Does that answer?
I just wanna make sure Danielle, yeah, she was remuted.
Hi,
Danielle, does that answer your question?
it does, and hopefully they will continue to be more inclusive, because we do know Crispus Attucks, who, right, his descendants, they qualify as well. So that's the pushback. There are plenty of people of color that have direct lineage to people during the colonial period that gave service, but because of racism, they were not, they don't have what you said, that, you know, the primary sources. I'm glad to know that we're relying on other ways to establish that direct lineage.
Be clear, you have to already establish the person first, right? Like Danielle couldn't just apply, have an ancestor. Good point of clarification.
I suggest that we not get into the mechanics at this point.
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
I think it's important to understand where you want to go, how you want to define your future population, for lack of a better term. And then we can go into, well, did you think of doing this or that to make it happen? Because it won't happen unless you do this. But we can do that later. But right now, it's not clear to me how you define how you want to diversify, how you want to include others, or what considerations.
Well,
So just to put just in terms of time management
Yeah,
stuff too,
yeah.
I want to take Becca's question, Elizabeth's question, and Karen's question, and then Stephanie can, I guess, speak, and then we'll talk about programming.
Do you have a question?
Did you have a question, Rashida?
Capital.
You're behind me. Capital. Well, and then we'll
Staffing, budget.
for a sec. Did you have a question?
Maybe it will be answered, but I guess because I understand that the programming will be, or has been, the community, I know I haven't done a lot with the museum, except for the running, but,
Run around it.
and we've had a celebration there, actually. I understand that the programming does reach out to the community, so because we're having this discussion, my real question then is, what would be or are the tangible benefits of being a member, since there is
Why be a member?
Yeah, because it seems that.
why be a member of the Dames?
Yeah, like are there tangible benefits and people, since we are saying, oh, we should what people in? Like, is it on a day now? That's a good question. Or is it, like, a discount that Guardian Gourmet, you know?
I mean, I think in our presentation, we said that our organization tends to appeal to people that are interested in genealogy and American history. We've got people that just love, lots of young kids, all kinds of ages, just love American history.
The programming that they have access to, that only members have access to, or parties that only members have access to, or anything like
No.
that that's exclusive to members?
No. I think it's a great question, and it gives me a chance, if you don't mind.
It is a great question. I think,
Not to undermine your marketing scheme, but there's no.
Yeah,
there's
but
nothing.
I think it gives me a chance also to explain something that I think it is important to clarify for you all. The New York Dames is a 501c3. So we are not a 501c7. We are not a social club. We have no gyms, we have no golf, we have no pools, we have no ability for people to come in and have a drink or have lunch when the club is, when the society is open. So I guess it's important for us to make sure that people understand that distinction. There's not, I want to make sure that we understand it's not a social club. It's really focused on the mission of historic preservation and education and interpreting historic sites. The houses are used to raise money, and we certainly have parties to raise money and to do fundraising. And that is something that members and others, you don't have to be a member to come to our parties, can do. But it is important to make that distinction.
Thank you, Marguerite. Rebecca, Lish?
Yeah, so many things. Thank you for your presentation. I would assume that since it was formerly under the administration of the Colonial Dames, you have some familiarity with the former plantation house at Mount Clair in Maryland. There's Teresa Moyer wrote a book about erasure of Black history entitled Ancestors of Worthy Life, about plantation slavery and Black heritage at that house in particular that the Dames were administering, and details the resistance that there was to change. I think that you're saying you can't define the organization by who it is. You have to define it by its mission, but then the language you use to describe the mission is in and of itself exclusionary. You talk about the purpose being to educate people in colonial and American history. So that, already puts parentheses around what is history. You, I'm sure completely unintentionally, use language in your presentation like referring to enslaved people as held by the Van Cortlandt family. My guess is they weren't so much held by as they were enslaved by and exploited by and used by. And you refer to Dinah as from Stanton House, when even your slide says enslaved at Stanton House. I understand that we have shameful history in this country. And I will confess to being a daughter of the American Revolution, or a granddaughter of the American Revolution, and a united daughter of the Confederacy by no choice of my own, because my mother loved genealogy. And she loved the idea that the king had given a land grant to some ancient relative. And all of that history was precious to her. And some of it is deeply, deeply abhorrent to her children and grandchildren. Much of it. When you talk about the way that the Dames began, and part of the purpose is, preserving Bibles and church records. Well, the other half of my family is Jewish. So there's no preserving any tradition that is not Christian within the Colonial Dames, as I understand it. You talk about patriotic service. Now, how is that defined? Preservation of these Christian relics and and exploitative locations and patriotic service is a very weird vague phrase. But the most troubling is the lineal bloodline descendants and ancestors of worthy life. And of 9,700, mainly men of white European ancestry, you hold up with pride and justifiable pride that you've made the effort to find them. One of the most well-known Indigenous women in all of history, and a woman with no last name. You say it is hard to find the descendants of these people, but you mentioned an organization that is descendants of enslaved African Americans, of enslaved Africans. Would some sort of partnership with an entity like that be a more meaningful gesture in terms of extending membership to a joint organization made up of both of those, not a secondary level of friendship and, you know, substandard category, but really, how is it hard to find people who have their own 501c? I don't understand that. You refer to a human being as having increased the profitability of the plantation, and it may not strike you as jarring or cognitively dissonant to be stating an interest in diversity and inclusion and progress, and still referring to a human being as who is enslaved as increasing the profitability of the plantation, and then pointing to the monetary value of, I don't have his name, the man who you memorialize with a, what?
Andrew Saxton.
Memorializing that man with a runaway slave ad, deriving the information.
Rebecca, I want to interrupt you just like one more minute to try to wrap it up, just because
I'm
it's
so
getting a little bit
sorry.
later. We want to talk about programming. You're making a
Yeah,
lot of
I'm
great
so
points,
sorry.
but I want to make sure to be mindful of time.
I understand. So the question for me is not necessarily about programming. The primary question is about what entity should be guiding this programming? What entity should be moving this museum into the future, and with what mission? And it seems as though even the language that's embedded in your mission statements is by force exclusive, excludes nearly, probably the vast majority of residents of the Bronx, excludes more recent immigrants, excludes people of color, excludes anyone without records and, bloodline lineage to point to. And I don't think there's any getting around that. I don't think there's any programming. What?
Partner. We'd love it if you'd help us partner, show us. This is the opportunity where community organizations can come together to help one another, to understand. And I think we come here today.
Having events at which white men in pantaloons and vests and tri-corner hats point wooden guns at local children as some sort of play strikes me as a very vivid image of programming that I find deeply disturbing.
On that note, I'm going to stop. Rebecca, if you have other things you want to add, I appreciate you adding them. Just send them in a note to the office,
Yes.
just in the interest of time.
Yes, thank you.
Meredith, I saw your hand went up. If there's something, can I go with the continuing order, or is there something you want to talk about that's relevant right now?
Oh, thanks, Deb. Real quick, because I know it's late. I just wanted to add on to some of Rebecca's comments. I think people are getting hung up on the mission, and I understand that certainly being a part of how, what guides programming. But one of the things that I'd like to just add here is that I think, the staff, I think that the Dames rely heavily on their professional staff who are professionals who work in museums like Nick, like myself, to really guide what takes place and the programming. And so that's another part of the reason that I'm very excited that the Dames are going to be working much more closely with my organization, the Historic House Trust. And this work is something that I've been doing for the last 20 years, thinking about how we engage community and thinking about how we talk about underrepresented history. So just wanted to add that in. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Meredith. We'll come right back to that. I just want to finish off with Elizabeth and Karen, who's our last two on membership, and then we'll talk about programming and the partnership with Historic House Trust. Elizabeth, did you have something?
Yeah, actually, my comment was going to be about programming. Should I wait?
Yeah, hang on one second. Karen, did you have something about membership?
No, I don't have anything about membership. I wanted to talk about.
And then Steph, you want to talk? I'm sorry, you want to talk about?
I want to talk about all the stuff that we've been talking about.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
we were talking about membership. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we've been talking about membership. We've been talking about something else. So I would just like to say that I think the presentation was really excellent. I am amazed at, the history of this site and that it's sitting here in the middle of our land. And I'm very happy that it's being discussed. And as I just want to remind everyone that, women, especially in the early ages, but even to today, we are a protected class because nobody listens to us. And we bear the burden of carrying along things that are important, like education, we're the educators, and history. And we should appreciate the work that these volunteers, as a member of a group that's filled with volunteers, the work of these volunteer women over those centuries is frankly remarkable in and of itself. And that they have staff to actually do some of their work, which we don't have any staff, we just do the work ourselves, is really also an added benefit. And if people want to add to what they're known as or grow the population that gets represented, that would have an influence on the history of the colonial age, I think that would be a good idea. I would suggest that, you start with like some kind of like little working group, because I always say, you got an idea, it's your problem to step up and work on it, especially as a volunteer group. That's what you need to do. And so I would ask that maybe you do a working group. We do that all the time. It could be just to do, outreach on how other people could identify their ancestry, since that seems to be something that people are interested in. And that's difficult. I don't even know who you get to do that. But certainly I need to remind everybody that we wouldn't have even known about the enslaved people's burial if it wasn't for Nick. He's the one that brought it to our attention. And he's the one that said, let's keep going. And he got Margot to bring in the people to do because I was there that freezing cold morning that they were looking for the graves. But it was Nick that did that. And if Nick wasn't working for this group, we wouldn't have known. So we need to appreciate what we have and try to take the diamond and make it into what we want. But we shouldn't take away from what they have accomplished. Hundreds of years of women volunteering to protect something that reminds us of where we as a country come from is an enormously important project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we should move on
Stephanie,
to
did you want-
programming
just a
and
sec-
not talk about this other
yeah,
stuff.
Stephanie, did you want to speak about membership, or can we move on to programming?
Well, I just wanted to actually, Karen, as always, is very thoughtful, and so I just wanted to piggyback off something that she had said, and I'm just going to punt it over to Stacy Weeder, who is a board member of Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Ehrlich. I wear two hats. I'm a Parks Department employee as the Van Cortlandt Park Administrator, and I'm also the Executive Director of Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. And so in this venue, I'm sharing the mic with Stacy. So that, she says iPad. Her, can you, I don't know if you can unmute her.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie, and good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Stacy Weeder. I am a part of the board of the Van Cortlandt Alliance, Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, excuse me. And on behalf of the Alliance, we wanted to just say that we appreciate being a part of the community board meeting tonight and included in discussions on what occurs here within the park. We're keen to continue with those discussions and have them be robust in exploring the future of the management of the house. And to that extent, as Stephanie said, kind of piggybacking off of what was mentioned, one of our recommendations is to create an advisory group that would have representation from the Dames, from the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, obviously from the community, but also from subject matter experts in the field that can then come together and really determine what might be best for the museum. And if it's agreed upon, the Alliance is happy to and willing to establish and coordinate those that group and the regular cadence of meetings if requested or preferred on that. As always, we consider the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance a huge part of our community, and we take our role in supporting the park and all aspects of it, including the Van Cortlandt House Museum, very seriously. And so we wanted to just mention that we look forward to continuing the discussions with the community, with New York Parks, with the Historic House Trust, and with the Dames as we determine what is best for our community and our history.
Stacey. I'll let you respond, and if not, we'll move on to, we'll talk 10 minutes on programming, and then we'll wrap up to move on to the meeting. Did you want to respond to Stacey?
That's a great.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. I think it would be a wonderful idea because it pulls the community and it kind of knits the community and the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance and the Dames and the House all much more closely in with the community, yeah, which is kind of what we're looking for. So yeah. Just on the topic of programming, I'd like to spend maybe 10 more minutes or so on it, and then we'll move on to the 50th precinct. So on the topic of programming, I mean, one of the issues was really just that we see in other historic houses really robust programming. And I mean, and I will say that one of the things that concerned me when I was originally starting to look into this was the cutting of staff. Like when I looked kind of over how many people did you employ in 2018, 2019, there were just more people. So for me, I had a couple of questions. One was just about where does the money come from programming, I guess? Was my biggest question, is kind of like, is it coming from admissions fees? Like, what's the limiting factor that's preventing you from having 4 full-time people and a volunteer coordinator and all of that stuff? Yeah. The stuff that the, other.
I'll let Marguerite. Yeah, Marguerite, would you like to answer that?
Hi, yes. I think the limiting factor is that we spend a serious amount of money each year just to maintain and to operate the site, and it is in the range of somewhere between $175,000 to $200,000 roughly a year. And what we would seek to do would be to increase grant writing, increase other ways of fundraising so that we can grow the staff to right size it, because it's a large house and there's a lot going on. And there is obviously a series of activities that are going to happen over the next couple of years, which make it somewhat challenging in that the museum will be open for a while, but then there will be a period of construction. And then after that construction is completed, there will be an opportunity to really have the museum be at full strength.
I would actually say the construction is almost an opportunity to kind of rejigger, or think about, or have like a thoughtful mental remodel.
That's right.
And then come out stronger.
Yeah, and I think, thanks, Marguerite, I think the current state of the house causes us to spend a lot of time.
So what is the maintenance, like, so my understanding is the Parks Department's responsible for the building. So how is it you guys are getting stuck? And we've got folks who've got experience with getting stuck with a bill from that maybe the Parks Department should be paying. How are you getting stuck with this bill? Like, what kind of maintenance is it that's really draining your?
Is it all right if I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, because of the property.
I honestly feel, and I think everyone on this committee knows that the Parks Department, and especially Van Cortlandt Park, they're heroes. They do amazing work. They're understaffed, and they're just underfunded and overextended. And so a lot of stuff comes up that we have to take care of, and that's just the nature of it. I would ask Meredith to cover her ears. She's told us, HHT has told us we're not to take care of some of these things, but sometimes just because of the necessity and of time, we do.
That's right.
And we see that as our responsibility. We try not to overstep our boundaries. But that's just the way it works.
I appreciate that, Clint. it's $175,000, and so I just wanted to know, like, is that electrical work you're paying for? Is that plastering? Is that painting? Is that?
Well, that also includes staffing.
Well, I would say, why don't we do this? We can promise to provide you with some more information supplementally that would clarify that and help you understand that. But I don't have that information with me right now. But that we can certainly provide it. But Meredith's right. There's a good chunk of it that's staffing.
Yeah.
So most of it's staffing. Because I was wondering also, like, once the repairs are done, right? We're about to spend $15 million on this house. Hopefully, it will be more waterproof.
Right.
Will some of those maintenance costs, or the bulk of those maintenance costs, go away, or is that mostly staffing? I guess is my question.
So the maintenance costs that you saw on that pie chart, those are maintenance costs, and we expect the bulk of those to go away. When we talk about the losses that we operate at, the shortfall, a lot of that is staffing. And not only do we not expect that to go away, we expect it to increase as we hire more staff. That's just a responsibility.
And I think the job will be much more attractive to someone that's qualified if they don't have to be in the basement mopping up the water, or Nick was changing a light bulb and the thing,
catches fire.
Exploded in his eye.
Yeah. So, okay, I see Ron Dutt's got his hand up, and then, and Stephanie.
I'll save my question, Deb. It's about programming. I know y'all are on Capitol right now. I'll save my question.
Your question, we're all questions are on the floor now.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So my question's about, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching in this area for 8.5 years. I've also grown up in this area along Van Cortlandt Park, in Norwood and now in Kingsbridge. So up until Sunday was the first time I known that we can take tours of the Van Cortlandt House Museum. And Nick did a really good job about the tour and explaining, like, the history and things of that nature, and how, there's field trips. But this is the first time on Sunday that I heard that there's field trips and people can take tours of the house. So I guess my question will be about, like, how can we improve outreach to schools and the broader community moving forward to show that more people can have access to the tours and also the education programming that the Van Cortlandt House Mansion has or offers to not only the public schools, but I know we have Horace Mann, we have other schools, Riverdale Country. How can we improve the outreach to these schools and the broader community to ensure that everyone has access to these programs?
Great question. Marguerite, do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to?
I wonder if, I think Nick's on. I don't know if we want to let him answer that. I know we've had a lot of conversations about this, about how to make the programming not only more accessible, but also easier to find and easier to pay for for the public schools anyway in the area. I don't know if Nick's around and if he wants to say anything about that.
Sure. So I think during COVID, a lot of teachers in our area that had been coming to the museum year after year had just retired because they were sick of teaching over Zoom. And so I think the museum needs to reach out more actively to the local public schools to get them in. And I think some kind of like either discount or free admission for a while would make sense to just get them in the building. Because I think, the reviews when they do come are really good. But now that I'm on, could I just respond to two other things that I heard? One was someone named Danielle earlier mentioned about, the difficulty in tracing ancestry for enslaved people held in our area, like in the, going back to the 1700s. Yeah, that is a real problem for individuals looking to, investigate their heritage. So I think it makes a lot of sense to try to, create some kind of alternate model for people looking to get membership into the Dames, if that's what they're trying to achieve. When we were investigating the enslaved African burial ground in Van Cortlandt Park, we were trying to put up a sign, and the Parks Department gave us kind of a hard time about the fact that we knew that there were enslaved people buried there, but it was very difficult to prove because the documents don't exist. And so there just has to be a different set of standards to like account for the fact that records were not kept for those people. And in terms of the maintenance, the question was like, what are you spending money on? And I think the house is in such bad shape, it needs millions and millions and millions of dollars in repairs that, it wasn't a matter of like, I don't know, replacing a doorknob, although it did need doorknobs. But I mean, if the roof is a problem, then you can't just call a maintenance guy to fix the problem with your roof. You need a new roof. And so I think that a lot of these problems will be taken care of with the capital campaign.
Thank you, Nick. I'm gonna go Stephanie Coggins.
Can we call on committee members first before we start calling on people outside?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you needed to speak.
No, I said I wanted to speak about programming.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that's, I first of all, I want to start by saying those of us who went on the tour on Sunday, I think really understand and appreciate how much Nick has done in the House Museum and in the park. Somebody said earlier, and I forget who it was, that he really started the ball rolling on all of this. He did the research. I think it was Karen who said this. He brought the information that he discovered to the community board, to the Parks Department, and that's where the Enslaved Peoples Project began. So, having Nick, don't ever let Nick get away, okay? I mean, he is a valuable resource, and he's a teacher. He knows how to talk to the kids. He has done wonderful work, and by all means, Nick is as important as the light bulbs and the doorknobs, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, he's got to be there. But the question has been raised. The school groups are one thing, and it's not that hard. We know what the area schools are. Reaching out to the public school system is not that difficult to do. My wife was a teacher. I know about the field trips and the teachers, how that all works. It's the broader community that I think has been a concern. There are so many people who live in the area who aren't even aware that there are tours of the Van Cortlandt House Museum, that they can be done, that they're free, that sort of thing, who don't really know. They know this building is there, and, there are people who run past it around the parade grounds and don't really know exactly what's in that building or what goes on there. That's what I really hope you guys could do, is improve on outreach, whether it's social media, whatever the methods are. I'm not an expert on, God knows, on social media. I'm totally ignorant. But that's what we need. We need to engage the community more. You know, we have the most incredible, valuable resource right here that goes all the way back to the colonial era. So much American history in that house, in that park, and not enough people in the community understand and appreciate it. And, you know, I would really love to hear you guys, you said you want to do more outreach. I would like to hear how you're going to go about doing that.
Thank you, Bob.
Love to hear somebody speak to that. What
Okay, to
what
that point.
plans do you have? How are you going to do the outreach?
Let me just start off and then maybe,
Yeah, Lee, I think
Marguerite and Meredith
Marguerite
can-
should, it was appropriate.
But, so that's our goal, that's, our goal for this, you know, I kind of see it as in the next phase. We have sort of 3 phases in front of us. There's the lead up to the construction, there's the construction phase, and then there's post-construction. And when we hit that post-construction phase, hopefully sometime in 20, we will have, you know, we'll be in 5th gear and we will be running. So the lead up to that is finding a director and the director hiring an assistant. So our social media, you know, our profile getting raised through as we lead into that construction phase, remote programming, so going to local libraries, and I think Meredith Horsford has done this at Dyckman House, and I think she has a model that we can really follow. So I'll leave it to Nick, yeah.
Let me just jump in real quick. So I think reaching out to teachers directly would be step number 1 in of local public schools. But also Stephanie Ehrlich has made a brilliant discovery that, you know, putting banners on the fence in the park is a way to reach people that come to the park. Not everyone's, you know, looking up the park on Facebook or whatever before they come to the park. And, you know, there are a lot of people that just, you need physical signage in the park to attract people. And I think it's definitely worth pursuing this idea that was put forth by the Alliance tonight about bringing some of the groups in the park. I mean, one thing I was told when I started working at the museum by my predecessor was that, unfortunately, people in the park tend to work in silos. So there's the rangers, and the park rangers are right next door, but I never talk to the park rangers. And there's all these entities within the park that don't really communicate. So I do think having some kind of group, or at least a periodic meeting of these different organizations, makes a heck of a lot of sense.
This is Marguerite. I think also, when we talk about the broader community, I think what we would want to do is at least discuss with the appropriate people, whether it's through the advisory committee that's Stephanie's idea or thought, or whether it's perhaps some of the members of this group. But I think there's a number of different ways to do this. One is to think about whether it might be appropriate to have citizen ambassadors, people who are really known in the neighborhood, who we ask to come in and maybe do a focus group on how can we get these folks in here, what's the best way, and have a conversation. And I think through a series of those kinds of focus groups with people who are invested in the community and are important to the community and know the community well, we should be able to make some, have some traction and have some good ideas that would come up, hopefully, so that we can all participate, and figure out a way to get more of the community into the museum.
Thank you. Bob, did you have anything else?
No, just wanted to say, the tour that we went on with Nick, it was the first time I'd been in the House Museum since before COVID, and it was really enlightening to see how much has changed and how much the enslaved people are now a part of the educational tour of the museum. So, I can't throw enough bouquets to Nick for what he's done, but nothing else on programming. Yeah.
Yeah, for.
Excuse me.
So I'm going to speak to you first as a community board member, then I'm going to speak to you from my profession. I'm a professor of this period and of public history and of public houses. So first, you're not visible enough in this community. You have let Nick be the standard bearer for historic preservation and historic programming. And one of the things that you're getting here is that this community would like more from you and more engagement. You've made a very nice presentation that does apparently speak of a capital project, but from our perspective, you've been recessive and hanging back with a shingle on a house that is, in our mind, a poor stepchild in your portfolio. So we would really like to see your continued commitment to this house, making it a jewel in your crown, okay? We want more from you, and we want you to take this as seriously as any property in your portfolio, okay, both nationally, because findings that Nick has begun are transformative and representative of historic changes in the field of historiography. And I would really say that if you do not own and belong and seek a new way of looking at colonial history through these discoveries of enslaved people and indigenous groups, equal shareholders in the forming of this nation, that you will miss the golden opportunity of a lifetime to expand your organization, raise money, make profitable alliances. You really need to believe in what we found here, okay? You need to be looking at how Monticello started to build a companion descendant community to right a really terrible wrong that we all know in that site. You need to look at Weeksville to find out how that community built an incredible stakeholder community in an all-black neighborhood that many people wanted to raise and turn into parking lots in the 1960s. Okay? You need to look at some failed, but we need you to do your benchmarking about what historic houses and what public history is thriving, and you're going to find it's because they were inclusive and because they followed the most cutting-edge scholarship. Okay. The last thing I'm going to say is that it's great to hear about the capital for the house. We need you to staff this properly in a diverse way that looks like this community, but people who know how to get grants that take advantage of the park's findings. The findings in the park are transformative for everybody. Okay. What that means is that there are enslaved people there and buried Africans that need our funding and our resources. We are in service to them right now. I want you to think about them as your constituency, okay? And it is the goal of the park and the Alliance to do right by them as well. We should all be in this business, okay? So we need you to look, and what you've been hearing about the identity politics of your board, really go to the point of, are you recognizing what the assets of this property is? And I'll just end by saying the entire designation of this park, according to the state of New York, is the house. We need the house, okay, to represent and include all the things that make this house a incredible colonial archive of all the peoples that have lived here, especially the people who have not been represented. So you have a really important role. When we need to protect the park and we go to the state for guidelines and they see Colonial House, Van Cortlandt House, and if it's not inclusive of all the things that are in the park, we all lose. Okay, so you have to know what your holding, the role that holding plays in the entire designation of the park. You are the keystone, according to the state, so you need to do it right, okay? You need to get all in and recognize the impact of finding buried Africans in the Bronx where no one thought there were slaves in the first place.
fabulous, and we are so grateful.
I'm telling you, I don't need a response. I just want you.
Fine, and I
Okay.
fully agree with you, Dr. Fanuzzi. I absolutely agree with you, and that's where I think we got distracted, unfortunately, by looking at membership versus the excitement of the group for the opportunities that are here in the Bronx to be able to tell broad stories as we try to be more inclusive of those new individuals that we are identifying. Thank you.
About both, but I'm gonna go to Stephanie Coggins, I'm gonna go to Maya, Elizabeth, and then we're done. Well, and I don't know who Peggy is, and then I guess Peggy, and then we're done. But everybody, like, just 2 minutes, and because we have to kind of wrap up the call. So Stephanie, you have any,
Okay, all right, yeah, I'll try to be quick. All right, so I have during COVID, I started a Facebook group that's called Riverdale, Spidendival, Kingsbridge, Inwood Views. It's a non-general posting group that focuses purely on content, art, history, culture, and community building. And one of the areas that I cover is Van Cortlandt House Museum. My group also took a field trip down to the House Museum, and the people that were in my group were very impressed. My group has 1,700 members in it. 1,700 members did not attend this meeting, but my point is this, the community, from what I see, and I have 1,700 people talking on my group, people are very, very proud of the Van Cortlandt Park House Museum and where it is going as a cultural institution. The one thing that I can say is that I do not hear anybody talking about the Colonial Dames and their membership issues. I hear people are very, very proud, regardless of their ethnicity, their race, their gender. I myself am Catholic Jewish. I'm in a mixed race marriage. I think that as Dr. Fanuzzi said, it's a jewel of our community. I've heard a lot of productive things talked about tonight, and that should be our focus, where the museum is going, not the Colonial Dames identity membership issues. So that's basically what I have to offer.
thank you, Stephanie. Maya? Maya, we can't hear you. Are you unmuting? All right, we're gonna go to Elizabeth while you get your sound figured out. Elizabeth?
Hi, thank you. And thanks for the very informative presentation. That was really interesting. And for taking the time. So I mean, I just want to briefly talk about programming. I think the issues are clear. And so I know it's very complicated to run robust. It's complicated and expensive to run robust programming. It takes a lot of logistics. It takes a lot of expertise. So I live in the neighborhood. I live just, and so I go to Van Cortlandt a lot and have been to, barefoot dancing and things at the house, but I'm going to speak as a educator. I work at Ostos Community College. We run a summer program for English language learners, recent immigrants, and they actually study the American Revolution. And we take them on field trips every summer, 6 to all around the city. And, the reality is that we end up going, to Morris Jamel Mansion in Manhattan. We go to Phillipsburg Manor in Westchester. We would love to come to Van Cortlandt Park, and we reach out every summer. I think it's sort of worked out maybe once or twice. The last time I remember going was like a decade ago. We did have a reservation for this summer, and that got canceled because of the power outage, but it never got rescheduled. So, and I'm not trying to point fingers or anything like that. I know it's really complicated. And so I feel like my biggest question is just sort of I know Van Cortlandt Park Alliance has robust programming. I get emails from them constantly about all the things going on. And so I just kind of wonder if an organization that has fundraising capacity and, established systems for this would be able to just respond with, more diverse, more programming, and I will leave it at that. I'm not an expert on any of that, but just, that from my view as an educator, that is the biggest thing. I would love to have something that was just like, here's the thing that we can go to that's in the
I will
Bronx,
stop
that's
you.
close.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Maya, did you get your sound worked out?
Can you hear me?
Peggy as well. There we go, now we can hear you.
Okay, great. Very quickly, a lot of historic houses have arts programming. Are you planning on doing any arts programming?
Thank you. Narrator. Any arts programming plans? We just thought nodding?
Absolutely. Maya, do you want to elaborate on, you mean, like kids' art projects or?
No, not by professional artists that work in the Bronx, like Dyckman Farmhouse.
That'd be
it's,
great.
artists in residence that do projects in the house. That also brings a lot of people, a lot of audiences to the house to see the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to just
talk with
chime
you.
in, Lee, if you don't mind. I
Yeah,
actually
sorry,
started
Maya,
those programs at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum. And so, we haven't gotten into too much collaboration and talk about specific programming, but I'm sure that that's something that will be, on the horizon at some point at the museum.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also just sort of shocked and dismayed that these possibilities are just coming into the conversations now, and these aren't things that you've thought of before. So it's a little disappointing, but I'm glad we're raising these issues. Thanks, that's all I got.
Go into history.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Peggy, last person. Peggy? You gotta unmute her.
Yeah.
Oh, got it.
If Peggy's not ready to speak, I know, as Deb very, very wisely pointed out, being the white man of a woman's organization, I've talked quite a lot this evening. But outside of my 4 hours of talking already, I just wanted to speak real quick, and I promise that's the end, just on a couple things.
As I know my colleague is, to be able to understand more of the issues that you're facing, the ways in which we can assist. I am not a New York Dame, neither is Cecily. We are staff members here representing not only, I think, our commitment to historic preservation and to be able to tell inclusive, full stories, but to be able to ask you to also help the women that we see that are trying to be volunteers on the ground. And there are not just women here, but I do know that there are numbers of different advisory boards, et cetera, around, lots of support that I think we can offer. Our museum boards for our museums have advisory boards in place. Some of them, certainly they have very diverse groups of scholars that we can help assist with. So I just want to thank you for giving us some ideas of what you would like to see, because we at headquarters can now help one of our properties and hopefully some of our volunteers and their staff members too. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for coming up from DC. And I think we've had a good discussion, and we've certainly gotten everything out on the table. I think Van Cortlandt House is perhaps one of the first historic houses for the Colonial Dames. And I think what we're trying to say to you is that even though we're in New York, it's also our favorite house, and that we think that you need to be paying more attention to it. with programming, and that with community advisory committees and bringing the community in to the decision-making pieces of it, with friends groups or advisory groups or whatever, and that we want to see more programming, fundraising, grant writing, and we want to, so that we can, see the actual effects of it at the House, not just school programming, but adult programming. I think that's where we are. Yeah.
I think there's one aspect that we haven't discussed, and that is, we received a letter from someone in the community that suggested we were applying for the right to run the museum, and we haven't discussed this, and I think we need some clarity on, because I don't like to be a target of anyone because they're not understanding the facts. So can you just talk, Deb, so that everyone can hear what it is that,
I'll give the 1 minute version, which is the level of detail that I know, and then and Meredith can correct me if I get anything wrong. But that the way the Parks Department works is with something like this house, there is a license, and the National Society of Colonial Dames of New York held the license, the very first license in the city, and that license, it renewed at different times over the years, and that license expired the last extension of that license was approximately 10 years ago. That since then, it's been kind of I use gentleman's agreement because the gender is all wrong, but that there's been an assumption that the license would continue moving forward. But there's no actual formal structure right now that says the National Society of Colonial Dames has to run the house. However, the Parks Department and Meredith have, they're still operating on the assumption that when they renew the license and it gets through the lawyers, that it would go to the National Society of Colonial Dames. That's correct, Meredith, correct? And so,
Thanks, I was just shaking my head. Yes, I think that mostly summed it up.
So Community Board 8 does not want us to renew the license, be on the license?
Community Board 8 the Community Board 8 has not voted on this as a board. The committee has not passed a resolution on this as a committee. The committee wanted to talk to you about this because we learned, we speak through resolutions. So if we all agree on something, an action or a position, we'll make a resolution on it. Other than that, it's a discussion. It's trying to get facts and to actually understand what's actually happening. And I think that, we've had a good opening discussion. I think what we really are saying is we want to see the more results. We want to see these committees. We want to have more conversations.
Okay.
More engagement. David, I'll let you finish real quick, and then I will move on to the 50th.
Yes. This is very productive, but have we defined an expectation of a deliverable back to us from the society?
Right now, we've opened this conversation. I guess.
I would say, would you mind coming back in a couple of months after you've followed through with the meetings with your fellow partners, and maybe, end of the year? We can come back and have an update.
Yeah, so our board year goes until
Well, the
May,
end of the fiscal year for us.
End of June.
May, June.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Just organizational meetings, and tell us what you've accomplished since we last talked.
I just want to chime in and just say, having done a lot of this work myself for many, many years, it does take a little bit of time, especially since we're going to be building up a staff at this site. So I think, from my perspective, it might take a little more than May for us to come back and give you an update so that we can give you something that's really robust. So perhaps maybe in partway through the next fiscal year, I think might be a little bit more reasonable.
I don't think we.
Let's not conflate the operational with the directional. We raised concerns about direction and the organization as opposed to the programming. And they're both very important, but they are fairly separate.
Yeah, I think what we're really thinking about, Meredith, is really by May, having an idea of if you want to make an advisory committee with Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, or if you want to make a friends group, or kind of you don't have to have done it, but what do you?
What do you want to be when you grow up?
What are you thinking about now that digest this, talk among yourselves, talk with Meredith, of course, everybody, and come back to us.
A big component of that is getting a new director in, because we really will work closely with to get you these,
But that person's gonna be a bit more operational than directional.
We want to make sure that also that they're strategic, that they're really, that there's, we want to see somebody focused on the house.
I think that.
Yeah, we know you're not going to come back in May and say, okay, we've done everything.
We fixed it.
But we want some sort of status update, some interim report that, indicates that you've heard what we said tonight, and here are the steps that we're working on to try to fulfill this.
A progress report.
Timeline on hiring the director?
Well,
As soon as we stop bothering them.
we have the position posted and we're getting applications in and we're gonna start interviewing next week. So I'm hoping, trust me, we are very motivated to get a new
Is the
director.
application period still open?
And I think
2 or 3 months.
And I think, if I can just speak to try to assist in terms of what we at National are trying to do to support your search, is to getting the word out to our colleagues in the community, those others who are also at some of our other sites. We want to make sure we're not just filling a position hastily, but somebody who appreciates the complex history of this site, who has had experience. I have reached out to a couple colleagues already who have done GPR at their sites. I think you need somebody who is going to understand the opportunities as well as somebody who can maintain the maintenance challenges. Do you see what I'm saying? So I would just ask your forbearance for these ladies to try to find the right fit for you.
We will shake the tree too and get you good candidates.
Any help there,
Keep
yeah.
in mind that it's the Bronx, so like somebody who's also just a good fit for the community in the Bronx.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I don't think I've ever said more honestly, we've exhausted this topic than we've exhausted this topic tonight. So thank you so much for your patience. And for all, I think this has been a really good discussion, so. I want to move on to the 50th, if Captain Ryan Pierce is still here. It's our next agenda item to talk about the recent muggings in Cortlandt Park.
Hi, yeah, I'm still here. Pardon my sinus congestion.
No,
So
absolutely not. Or
as you
absolutely
guys
no
know, we've had like a series of robberies. We've had 2 different robbery patterns going since basically November. The 45th precinct actually caught the guy from the first one. We haven't taken a hit on that since like November though. And then we took another 5 pattern hit from like December to January. The last hit on that one was January 3rd. So we haven't actually had a robbery in the park since January 3rd, which going back to before I got here back in like March was like the longest stretch we haven't had one. So that's good news. Anybody that walks through, you're going to see a light tower. The borough lent us 2 smart cars, which we have the NCOs manning during the hours of the robbery. Stephanie's smiling because I know she's seen them. So essentially those robberies for the more recent pattern, which is still open and the purpose outstanding, is it's a male Hispanic on a moped that brandishes a screwdriver. To usually a single jogger and usually older and usually female. So we put some information out about just park safety stuff. I know that the parks actually reached out to, was it CBS? I think you guys did CBS and put some protective information out. And like I said, additionally, we have those other resources that we stuck in the park, and sort of, I think all those layers on top of each other seem to have had a pretty good effect since we haven't taken one since the 3rd.
Do you have any idea why all of a sudden this started happening?
I don't think it was that sudden. So there's been, like I said, since about March, we took from March of 2023 until the end of the year, I think we took almost 20 robberies in the park. I don't think it was sudden. I just think that the odds, it's almost always the same thing, right? So it's a moped in the park, because there's a lot of mopeds cutting through the park, and we've done like 4 or 5 joint ops with parks and with the 4-7. We've taken like 40 of them out of the park, confiscated them. So there's almost always mopeds in the park, and when you stop these guys, 9 out of 10, it's a delivery guy cutting through Yonkers, from Yonkers to the Bronx or vice versa through the park. And when they use the bicycle GPS on Waze, it cuts right through the park, and it looks like they're supposed to be in there, and they're not. So I think there's sort of there's a general idea that the mopeds aren't a problem because most of them aren't, and there's a lot of them in there. And then every once in a while, there's somebody that's taking orders, and it's usually phones. Somebody that's trying to grab phones, and everybody that's jogging usually has AirPods in, and they're not really paying the mopeds any mind. They're taking advantage of that. But I don't think it's been sudden. I think it's been sort of a slow build. And there's been, since I've been here I got here in August, there's been 2 different patterns of it. And it's just sort of a matter of, keeping on top of the patterns.
Is there any particular time of day?
Yeah, actually, so the most recent pattern had a really tight window. So we didn't take a single robbery outside of the hours between 12 noon and like 6 p.m. So, and it's actually even tighter than that. I'm just giving a little bit of leeway because some of the complainants, like if you're up on one of those trails all the way up by Yonkers and they take your phone and you're by yourself, we don't fine you for about an hour when you show up at the precinct. So, we some of the times are a little iffy. So I'm making the window a little more broad than it actually is, because it was really more close to like, 1 p.m. to about 5 p.m.
Captain, what kind of communications have you had with Yonkers PD? Because I know of at least one incident on the Putnam in Tibbetsburg Park. So, and of the same MO.
So my understanding is that even though that park is in Yonkers, it's covered by Westchester. And I've spoken to their RTC, which is like it's almost like our version of operations. We have their radio. So we can talk to them. They put stuff over, we put stuff over, and they've joined us on a couple of the joint ops we've done with Parks and 4-7.
Joint ops being what? What kind of operations are you conducting?
These anti-moped operations.
Secrets. Huh?
It's the moped operations. We go after mopeds in the park.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, there's confiscation happening, Captain, correct?
Yeah, no, so most of the time, unlicensed operators, unlicensed mopeds, they go. We keep those, and they don't get them back. We've done so much enforcement with that in the last year or so that you're actually, if you guys look around, you're starting to see license plates on some of these things. The good news is, the drivers are still usually not licensed, so we'll still take the moped. You can't drive it, so you can't possess it.
How many confiscations? 3,
30, 300?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like on the last 5, you're looking at between 40 and 50, somewhere in that range.
Here's a sense of scale. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have you been coordinating with the Parks Enforcement Patrol, or have you been primarily working with the 47?
Both. So when we do the joint ops, we include PEP, we include the 4-7, we include Westchester and Yonkers. More recently, because the guy from this pattern actually hit in the 3-4 and the 4-9, we also included them on the last one too.
How effective have the drones been in your efforts?
So there's some legal issues with the drones. I'm not going to presume to know or understand them. I'm not an attorney, but so we did use a drone. But we can only use the drone to sort of map out where we want to put cameras. And Central Robbery asked for some cameras. So you're probably going to start seeing some cameras in the park if they can get them.
In terms of cameras, you may want to talk with public safety as we enter the next budget cycle in the next 3 months.
Well, we still have budget left over from the last set that I ordered. So I think in terms of budget, we're good. Oh my God, Jeff Dinowitz, we had like $750,000 and I requested 10 cameras that we haven't gotten yet. So we're still way under budget with the cameras. The issue with the park though is that our cameras
Never mentioned money to a community board.
well, they're just for cameras. So, I'm sorry, the cameras we use, they require internet and they require electric. So the problem with part of the park is not everything is lighted. So we're not necessarily going to be able to get the cameras where we want to without some major electric stuff happening.
So are you thinking about putting cameras though inside of Van Cortlandt Park, just in the areas where there's already existing electricity?
So yes, if we can get them, yes.
but it won't be on the trails where things are happening.
Right, I mean, it'll probably be the golf house and the man.
Well, I mean, we hit right behind the golf house, right on that trail, which is why that light tower is there. So having a camera there would have been awesome. We got a pole camera out on Van Cortlandt Park South, which is out by the street, facing one of the trails that we took a bunch of hits on, but we didn't get anything from it. We actually got.
You able to do temporary cameras the way DOT does?
So I think that those exist. I've never seen one. The only time I saw it was when I was in the 4-4. And I don't know how they got that.
It's certainly, I guess, something we could ask about, right? Particularly for
I
someone
can ask,
more
but
remote. If you've got a
I'm gonna
light tower
guess
there,
that
maybe a
if
camera
there's
can
only
go right on
3
it.
or 4 of them in the borough, those are gonna be used at like extreme violence locations. We're probably not gonna get them for a robbery pattern that I haven't had a hit on in 21 days. Just being honest.
Okay. A-Rod. A-Rod, can you, are you able to unmute yourself? Anybody, any other questions? That's all the questions I had. Thank you so much. I give you a lot of thanks for just staying on this call and, through the whole conversation to quite late. So thank you so much for, updating us on the state of the park.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
Security of the park is really important, the enjoyment of the park. So you do really important work, so thank you for that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Right? So next on.
We should give these folks the opportunity to leave.
Yeah, no, they already know they can go if they want.
We're probably midway through this meeting right now.
No, Bob, wait, I got an agenda. I've got more than one agenda. So, Stephanie, so you're here for the presentation on Let's Green NYC. How do you feel about us tabling this presentation until February?
I think that would be fine. I will just say that there is an initiative called Let's Green NYC, which is Parks Department wanting folks to get out and volunteer. I can talk more about it at the next meeting, but if you go to the Parks Department website, they've done some really great things to make it easy to find volunteer opportunities. And, shameless plug, you can always volunteer with Van Cortlandt Park Alliance in the park.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And in February, we'll have our stewardship groups here, hopefully. So that'll be a good matchup of presentation and stewards. So is there any old business? Under new business, I just wanted to touch on the fiscal year budget conversation. So I sent around the fiscal year 25 budget priorities for the Parks Department, or for the Parks Committee. There's copies over there if you need them. And basically, I just wanted to make sure you had it, so that you had a sense of it, and then also to remind everybody what we did, particularly for folks who weren't on the committee last year. What we did was, we decided, capital budget requests are always the biggest, there's always the biggest demand for those. So we really forced ourselves to pick the top 10 and only give the top 10 to the board as a whole, so we weren't flooding them with our capital. So that means that there's this other list, which is things that did not make the top 10, but we wanted to make sure they were documented because they're good ideas. So when we meet in February, we can discuss our current top 10 and our list of additional things that we like, and decide if there's anybody on this list that can get knocked off onto, or has gotten funded, and vice versa. If there's things we want to promote back onto the capital list. And then on the back is our expense budget list, which is, for the expense budget, it's 4 items. David?
I just want to say, I highly encourage you to merely use this as a historical reference. Please be as creative as you can. For example, we never thought about cameras on, within Van Cortlandt, on the trails, and all. Completely new idea. So if other new ideas come to you, please bring them forward and not just say, yeah, let's just do 3, 7, and 9 from last year.
For the house. Oh, for the house.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Part of our discussion, the Van Cortlandt Mansion was not on our agenda, or just part of our discussion last year either, when we were.
Boy, those pictures of the old gardens.
I know, like, how about getting a sculpture, like that fountain back? Like, we could put that fountain back on our capital list.
Then there's the steps, which,
And there's the steps.
Steps have always been.
We should propose something, rather than us just making something up.
I do, and I do
Yeah.
think we need to be respectful of the environment. We know an awful lot more about the below-ground resources, and I believe there are some wetlands there.
Down the hill, sort of, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to Margaret's point, yes, like what we would love is for you to say to us,
Yeah, what do you need?
what we would love is to have, like, I know Nick has talked about changing the entrance, right? Or remodeling the fountain, or doing some horticultural garden area to make the entrance more, or changing the fence, right, so that there's a slightly different entrance. Stuff like that. We want you to think about it. We want the executive director to think about it. We, most importantly, want you to get community input on it, and, you know, advisory group or whatever, and come back to us. Karen is shaking her hands, and so I want to make sure, she's waving her hands violently. She must have something very smart to say.
Hang on. Well, unmute.
Ask her to unmute.
Yep, I did.
I have an item to put on the budget. That's not in Van
what's your
Cortlandt
item to put on
Park,
the budget?
unfortunately for Stephanie. We need to put the park area from 230th Street to 225th Street along the old Putnam Trail, which is now owned by Metro North, to make it into a greenway.
Oh, okay, the purchase of it, that's the capital camp. That's the
Setting
capital
aside money
reserve.
for easement, yes, this is what we
Yes.
talked about.
Well, you'd like to have it designed too, so I would make it in two budgets. We're gonna ask all of the community boards to do that all along the line, but right now, this is the first thing. You have to that has to be a really important project.
So I put it in the notes, Karen, and what we'll do at the next meeting is that's gonna really be our main thing, is to talk about the budget stuff, and tweak language and stuff, so we'll, put some language together for it in February.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, it's great. Anybody else, anything else as far as, budget priorities? Start getting you used to the list. So, so next up on the agenda is adjourning. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
There we go. The meeting is adjourned. 9:31, Bob.